Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Monday, October 31st, 2022. The Supreme Court hears two cases challenging the use of race in college and university admissions, with a number of the conservative justices questioning whether the current precedent, which allows race to be one factor of many, should be overturned. President Joe Biden suggesting a new tax on large oil companies' record profits, what's known as a windfall tax, unless those companies increase production to bring down gas prices. Countdown to Election Day, just over a week away. Final debates in the tight and closely watched races, including for Georgia governor. We'll hear an exchange between Republican incumbent Brian Kemp and the Democratic challenger Stacey Abrams on abortion. Federal charges filed against the man accused of viciously attacking Paul Pelosi, the husband of U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, last week in the Pelosi's San Francisco home. Those charges include assault and attempted kidnapping. Suspect David DePape telling police he was looking for the speaker, wanted to hold her hostage, and break her kneecaps. In Russia's war against Ukraine, U.S. State Department reaction to Russia's pulling out of the United Nations brokered deal to export grain from Ukraine. And it's Halloween at the White House. President and First Lady hosting some local young trick-or-treaters. Now to the U.S. Supreme Court, hearing oral arguments in a couple of cases today challenging use of race in university and college admissions. An article with USA Today reads, the Supreme Court's conservative majority signaled skepticism Monday over the use of race-conscious admissions at American colleges in one of the most controversial cases before the court this year, questioning the boundaries of such policies and whether they are actually needed to ensure diversity. At issue are policies at Harvard College and the University of North Carolina that permit admissions offices to weigh the race of applicants as one of many factors to help decide who will be accepted. Depending on the scope of the court's ruling, the outcome could have profound implications beyond higher education, spilling over into workplace diversity programs and other efforts to confront discrimination. This is the USA Today article. It continues, several of the court's conservatives noted that the 19-year-old precedent that permits the use of race in admissions had warned that such policies shouldn't be needed forever. Here's a part of the first case, the one dealing with North Carolina. The case is Students for Fair Admissions, a group that sued against the university. Justice Clarence Thomas questioning North Carolina Solicitor General Ryan Park.
Mr. Park, I've heard the word diversity quite a few times, and I don't have a clue what it means. It seems to mean everything for everyone. And I'd like you first, you did give some examples in your opening remarks, but I'd like you to give us a specific definition of diversity in the context of the University of North Carolina. And I'd also like you to give us a clear idea of exactly what the educational benefits of diversity at the University of North Carolina would be.
Yes, Your Honor. So first, we define diversity the way this court has in its court's precedents, which means a broadly diverse set of criteria that extends to all different backgrounds and perspectives and not solely limited to race. And there's a factual finding in this record, PEDAP 113, that there are many different diversity factors that are considered as a greater factor in our admissions process than race. We have a particular interest in recruiting and enrolling rural North Carolinians. In the last incoming class, 4 out of every 10 students who entered the campus doors were from rural North Carolina. 1 out of every 12 students has a military affiliation, including the most veterans on campus since World War II. And so we value diversity of all different kinds and all the ways that people differ in our society. On the educational benefits question, Your Honor, I don't think it's actually disputed here that there are real and meaningful educational benefits that come with diversity of all kinds. SFFA's own expert, this is on JA 546, conceded and agreed enthusiastically, in fact, on the stand, that a racially diverse and a diversity of all kinds leads to, quote, a deeper and richer learning environment, leads to more creative thinking and exchange of ideas, and critically reduced bias between people of different backgrounds and not solely different racial backgrounds.
But you still haven't given me the educational benefits. I didn't go to racially diverse schools, but there were educational benefits. And I'd like you to tell me expressly, when a parent sends a kid to college, that they don't necessarily send them there to have fun or feel good or anything like that. They send them there to learn physics or chemistry or whatever they're studying. So tell me what the educational benefits are.
So there's three main buckets, Your Honor, and the first, and I think most pertinent to the question that you asked, is the actual truth-seeking function of learning in a diverse environment. I would direct the court to the Major American Businesses brief, which discusses a whole extensive, rigorous, peer-reviewed literature that diverse groups of people actually perform at a higher level. So the most concrete possible scenario is stock trading. And there are studies that find that racially diverse groups of people making trading decisions perform at a higher level, make more efficient trading decisions. And the mechanism there is that it reduces groupthink, and people have longer and more sustained disagreement, and that leads to a more efficient outcome.
The North Carolina Solicitor General Ryan Park questioned by Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas at the oral argument today. The lawyer for the group that brought this case, the group is Students for Fair Admissions, the lawyer is Patrick Strawbridge, was asked this by Justice Sonia Sotomayor.
Can we stop a moment? And I want to break down what you're talking about. Sometimes race does correlate to some experiences and not others. If you're Black, you're more likely to be in an under-resourced school. You're more likely to be taught by teachers who are not as qualified as others. You're more likely to be viewed as having less academic potential. Even in your own arguments in your brief, you correlate race to lots of other things that are not necessarily causal, but which do correlate. How do you tease that out? Well, how do you want an admissions officer to say, I'm not going to look at the race of a child to see if they had all of those socioeconomic barriers present, and despite that they got very high school scores, maybe a little lower or a lot lower SAT scores, but I'm going to think about that. You're asking them to just shunt it aside?
Yeah, racial classifications have always been disfavored for a number of reasons. They are necessarily divisive. They carry stigmatic harm.
So why is it that in the Reconstruction era, just when the 13th, 14th amendments were being passed, Congress spent a lot of money in trying to get Black children, whether they were children of slaves or free slaves, to be educated in integrated schools? They had a belief, didn't they, that integration itself provided a value?
That is true. Of course, most of the Freedmen Bureau's activities are entirely consistent with this court's existing strict scrutiny rationale, even in the educational context, that remediation is an acceptable, compelling interest.
But that's only remediation for what? For slavery.
Well,
and these programs were made available to Black free children.
Well,
many of them.
Well, and that's true, and also the Freedmen Bureau.
And the Berea, Kentucky school that was supported by federal funds required a 50-50, 50 Black% children and 50 white% children.
I'm not sure that the sources that are cited in the brief support that view. There was a desire to make the education at Berea open to all, but as far as we can tell, the actual policy was they did not make distinction among applicants by race. The only requirement from what we could tell is a willingness to actually be educated in an integrated and co-educational environment at Berea College. So Berea College, of course, was also a private school.
Now you're assuming in your argument that race is the only factor that gets someone in to a school. Could you point to any application? I thought under the Guter framework, you can't use race exclusively, but you can use it as one among many factors.
Yes, and obviously we have quarrels with the logic of that. In a zero-sum game like college admissions, if race is going to be encountered, that means some people are going to get in and some people are going to be excluded.
Patrick Strawbridge is the attorney for the group Students for Fair Admissions, questioned by Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor. The oral argument in this first case concerning the University of North Carolina policies ran about 2 hours and 45 minutes. There was a second case challenging Harvard College admission policy and the use of race. That ran another 2 hours. You can find the full audio, and it's only audio, that's what the Supreme Court is allowing at this point, at our video library and audio library, cspan.org. We covered it live. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson recused herself from that second case because she sat on Harvard's Board of Overseers as the case was moving through the lower courts. For more background on the cases and how the current lineup of justices are viewing this issue of race and college and university admissions process versus the previous cases that were decided, C-SPAN spoke with Mark Walsh, a contributing writer for Education Week and the American Bar Association Journal.
The challengers here, this is an organization, they don't have individual plaintiffs in this case, but they do allege that Harvard's, in particular Harvard's plan discriminates against Asian American applicants. The federal district court found there was no discrimination. If you look at the statistics, Students for Fair Admissions would say that higher qualified black applicants, lower qualified black applicants are accepted at a higher rate than Asian American applicants who are higher qualified under Harvard's own admissions criteria. But again, two federal courts have upheld Harvard's plan. One federal court, a federal district court, has upheld the University of North Carolina's plan, and the Supreme Court kind of grabbed that case to be heard before a federal appeals court could rule.
What do we know about this organization itself, Students for Fair Admissions?
So this is an organization founded by a man named Edward Bloom, who is well known around the Supreme Court or around Supreme Court litigation. He's been involved in voting rights challenges, was involved in the Shelby County case, which greatly limited the Voting Rights Act, the formula that required certain states and localities to have their voting changes approved by the federal government. He's been involved in other challenges to affirmative action, including the Fisher versus University of Texas case, which he ultimately lost, or his organization ultimately lost. There's a narrative that he's this one-man person, and he is. He's a former stockbroker and someone who ran for Congress who is not a lawyer, and he has been behind these cases, but there's been some pushback about that narrative because he gets funding from a lot of right-wing and other sources. So.
One's a public university, one's a private university. Talk about the constitutionality aspects of those things.
Yes, so Harvard University as a private institution is not really governed by the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, but it is governed by Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibits race discrimination. And then University of North Carolina would be governed by both the Equal Protection Clause and and Title VI. So there have been some discussion among legal experts about whether that might lead to differing rulings. In the Bakke case, the famous 1978 case that struck down quotas but allowed colleges and universities to consider race for creating diverse student enrollment. The court kind of equated the two provisions, but it's we'll see what the discussion is today between the two cases on what the current thinking is on that.
What's been the history of the Supreme Court on these type of cases, and how has that changed because of the Supreme Court, and how it's changed because of various people coming in and coming off the court?
Right. So it was 1978, as I said, the Bakke case is when the court first really considered this issue at the higher education level. And as I said, that was a complicated result. Justice Lewis Powell's singular opinion, but that was in the middle of the court, became the controlling opinion. Most legal experts would say that endorsed and embraced student diversity as a rationale. Then, roughly 25 years later, 2003, there are two cases come to the court from the University of Michigan, one involving the undergraduate college, the other the law school. The undergraduate college assigned extra points to underrepresented minorities. The court struck that down, but the law school considered race as part of a holistic process for admissions, and the Supreme Court upheld that in the opinion by Justice Sandra Day O'Connor. And she wrote in that case that, it's been 25 years since Bakke. We expect that 25 years from now, 25 years from 2003, these kinds of measures will no longer be necessary. But in the meantime, there have been a few other cases, and now we're 19 years, and by the time this decision comes out, 20 years out, and we have a different court. We know at least 3 members of the court are highly skeptical of these kinds of uses of race because they dissented in the Fisher case from 2016. That was a 4-3 decision that upheld the University of Texas's program. Justice Alito wrote a very vociferous dissent against affirmative action signed by Chief Justice Roberts and Justice Clarence Thomas. Now, 2 of the members of the Fisher majority are gone. Justice Anthony Kennedy, who retired, and Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who died in 2020, and they've been replaced by more conservative members who have some signs, some track record of skepticism about these, but they haven't specifically ruled.
Mark Walsh, a contributing writer for the ABA Journal and Education Week on C-SPAN's Washington Journal morning program. On the 2 Supreme Court cases in which the justice heard oral arguments today, both brought by that group, Students for Fair Admissions, one against the University of North Carolina, the other against Fellows and President of Harvard College. The Federalist Society holding a discussion about the cases after the oral argument, and Amanda Shaner of the Wharton School, Legal Studies and Business Ethics Assistant Professor, pointing to a series of questions asked by the newest justice, Ketanji Brown Jackson, in that first case, University of North Carolina.
Justice Jackson had a hypo in which she said, okay, what if you have a student who's from 5 generations in North Carolina, and it's a white student, and they say, my family's been here from before slavery, 5 generations have gone to UNC, and I really honor my family to be able to go to UNC. And another student says, my family's been in North Carolina since before the Civil War. My family was enslaved. They've not had the opportunities to go. People in my family have not had the opportunities to go to UNC, and it would really honor my family and my history in North Carolina to do that. And she flipped the argument on its head, and she said, under the petitioner's argument, the first guy, the white guy, can have his history give him a bump, whereas the second guy cannot, because it would be understood to be a plus factor on the basis of race, including, the petitioner said, any kind of basis of your family and slavery is considered such a proxy for race that it couldn't be a plus factor in any kind of university consideration. I thought that was really interesting, an interesting argument, and one that, again, we'll see whether or not the court deals with it. The final thing I'll say is what was really interesting to me was the kind of, I have said before, is depending on how these cases come out, it strikes me that things like Title VII and the race-neutral plans are definitely under threat, because if the court were to say, educational, diversity in educational context is not a compelling interest, they might say, if you adopt a race-neutral plan, but with the goal of encouraging racial diversity, that alone violates the Constitution. And I took the oral argument not to be going in that direction whatsoever. And I think that's fascinating, because it sounded to me like there are enough justices on the court to protect race-neutral plans, even if the race-neutral plans are adopted in part for the reason of encouraging racial diversity, which I think would mean that things like the top 10% plans, Title VII, that would really affect. There's a case coming up now, Thomas Jefferson High School, raising the same question. I think if I'm right, I think that that's a different outcome. It may mean that we get a narrower opinion than I had expected, and some of the other kind of commentators has accepted.
Amanda Shaner is with the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania, Legal Studies and Business Ethics Assistant Professor, in a Federalist Society discussion today after the Supreme Court cases. The current Supreme Court term started about 4 weeks ago and runs through June 2023, so the decisions in these cases dealing with race and college and university admissions could be issued anytime between now and middle of next year, but most likely it'll be near the end of the term, given precedent of other cases on highly controversial topics. And speaking of the Supreme Court, former President Donald Trump today filing an emergency appeal with the High Court after a lower court did not reverse its ruling requiring that he turn over his tax records to the U.S. House of Representatives Ways and Means Committee. It's a case that's been going on for several years. House Democrats say that Donald Trump's tax returns are needed to review how the IRS does routine presidential audits. But Donald Trump's attorneys writing the committee's purpose in requesting President Trump's tax returns has nothing to do with funding or staffing issues at the IRS and everything to do with releasing the president's information to the public. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Live Tuesday on C-SPAN Radio at 11 a.m. Eastern, a discussion about threats to elections with the acting Pennsylvania Secretary of the Commonwealth, a Democrat, and the former Kentucky Secretary of State, a Republican, hosted by the Center for American Progress. And live Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern, CDC Director Dr. Rochelle Walensky talks about preparing for the next wave of COVID-19 at a program held by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation. Listen to C-SPAN Radio anywhere on your smart device. Say, play C-SPAN Radio.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast wherever you get your podcasts and on the free C-SPAN Now mobile video app. President Biden calling on oil companies to increase production or to be subject to a potential windfall profits tax. A White House statement ahead of the president's remarks points to reports over recent days of major oil companies making record-setting profits even as they refuse to help lower prices at the pump for the American people. President speaking today at the White House.
One by one, major oil companies have reported record profits, not just a fair return for hard work. Every company is entitled to that, a fair return for the work they do or innovation they generate. But I mean profits so high it's hard to believe. Now, the second quarter, the profits were really high, but the third quarter, last week, Shell announced that it made $9.5 billion in profits for the third quarter. $9.5 billion. That's almost twice as much as it made in the third quarter of last year. I think that's something. You think that's incredible? I thought, that's as good as high as it's going to get. Then along came Exxon. Exxon's profits for the third quarter were $18.7 billion. One quarter, $18.7 billion. Nearly triple what Exxon made last year. And the most in its 152-year history. It's never made that much profit. In the last 6 months, 6 of the largest oil companies have made more than $100 billion. $100 billion. And we had a little discussion about this, the three of us and others. $100 billion in profits in less than 200 days. That's not bad. And here's why this matters. I think it's outrageous what the size of the profit. Here's why it matters. These companies were making average profits they've been making by refining oil over the last 20 years, instead of the outrageous profits they're making today. And if they passed the rest on to the consumers, the price of gas would come down around an additional 50 cents. If they're investing their profits at historic rates in their U.S. operations, then America would be producing more oil today, and prices would be down even further. But rather than increasing their investments in America or giving American consumers a break, their excess profits are going back to their shareholders and they're buying back their stocks, so the executive pays are going to skyrocket. Give me a break. Enough is enough. Look, I'm a capitalist. You've heard me say this before. I have no problem with corporations turning a fair profit or getting a return on their investment in innovation. But this is remotely what's happening. Oil companies, record profits today are not because they're doing something new or innovative. Their profits are a windfall of war. The windfall from the brutal conflict that's ravaging Ukraine and hurting tens of millions of people around the globe. You know, at a time of war, any company receiving historic windfall profits like this has a responsibility to act beyond their narrow self-interest of its executives and shareholders. I think they have a responsibility to act in the interest of their consumers, their community, and their country. To invest in America by increasing production and refining capacity, because they don't want to do that. They have the opportunity to do that. Lowering prices for consumers at the pump. You know, if they don't, they're going to pay a higher tax on their excess profits and face other restrictions. My team will work with Congress to look at these options that are available to us and others.
President Biden at the White House, he mentioned those standing beside him. They would be the Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen and the Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm. On Friday, when the third quarter earnings reports did come out, Chevron CEO Mike Wirth was interviewed on Bloomberg TV about the profits.
Would you call these windfall profits?
No, I wouldn't. You know, we're in a commodity business that goes through cycles. There are hard times, as we saw just 2 years ago, where we had enormous losses. You move into another part of the cycle, and we have, you know, with strong earnings. Good times don't last, just like the difficult times don't last. We have to invest through those cycles, and it's important that we do in order to continue to meet the growing demand for energy. We need an approach to energy that balances economic prosperity, energy security, and environmental protection. And that's, I think that's the frame that we think within, and that's the frame we try to engage with policymakers within.
Chevron CEO Mike Wirth on Bloomberg TV on Friday. Wall Street today, the Dow down 128, NASDAQ down 114, S&P down 29. Election Day is just over a week away. On Sunday, Georgia Republican Governor Brian Kemp debating Democratic nominee for that race, Stacey Abrams, for the second and final time. CNN reports that Brian Kemp has led in most polling of the race, but Stacey Abrams, who came within a few thousand votes of pushing their 2018 race to a runoff, has a strong base of support and has succeeded in helping to mobilize Democrats in her campaign and those of other high-ranking Democratic candidates, including President Joe Biden and Senators Raphael Warnock and Jon Ossoff in their 2020 campaigns. One of the issues in Sunday's debate, on which there was disagreement, abortion policy.
If the legislature passes a more restrictive abortion law, abortion bill, would you sign that bill?
Well, I'm not going to count on, say yes or no to any specific piece of legislation without actually seeing exactly what it's doing. It's not my desire to go move the needle any further on this issue. We've been dealing with this issue for 3 years. That's where the General Assembly was. I personally don't see a need to go back, but when you're governor, you have to deal with all kind of legislative issues that are out there. So we'll look at those when the time comes. But again, my focus is going to be on helping Georgians fight through the 40-year high Joe Biden inflation that's been caused by disastrous policies in Washington, D.C. And we're going to be, our first order of business is going to do another tax rebate, to do property tax relief, to help Georgians to be able to cope with going to the grocery store or the gas pump.
So let's be clear, he did not say he wouldn't. We know that he has praised the Texas bounty system that allows neighbors to make $10,000 by reporting on women. We know that under the law that he signed, women can be investigated for miscarriages and other pregnancy losses, and that 52 counties have said that they indeed will pursue those investigations because they don't think they have a choice. We know that under this governor, women are in danger. Georgia is already #1 for maternal mortality, and it is only going to get worse when women are forced to carry pregnancies, when 1 in 5 women in Georgia does not have health insurance before pregnancy, will be compelled to carry that pregnancy to term. And while there has indeed been improvements in Medicaid expansion and Medicaid to provide access for women during pregnancy, on the first birthday of that child, that health care goes away. Brian Kemp does not have a plan for the lives of the women who are being forced to carry pregnancies to term that are unwanted pregnancies. But more importantly, he refuses to protect us. He refuses to defend us, and yet he defended Herschel Walker, saying that he didn't want to be involved in the personal life of his running mate, but he doesn't mind being involved in the personal lives and the personal medical choices of women in Georgia.
Debate in Atlanta on Sunday from WSB-TV. More from the CNN article. They write the vast differences between Georgia Governor Brian Kemp and Democrat Stacey Abrams were on full display in the closing statements on Sunday night, but both candidates made the same process, to put Georgians first. The Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, up for re-election this year, and on Sunday he debated his Republican challenger, Joseph Pinion. They were at Union College in Schenectady, New York. And one of the issues that came up in that debate, Friday's violent attack on the husband of House Speaker Nancy Pelosi.
Candidates, I want to talk about the outbreak of political violence that we've seen, especially the recent headlines. Start with you, Mr. Schumer. The recent home invasion and violent attack on the spouse of Speaker Nancy Pelosi has highlighted the dangers faced by many elected officials. Do you believe the attack in San Francisco is an isolated incident or part of a larger trend?
Well, first, my heart goes out to Paul Pelosi and Nancy Pelosi. I've spoken with her a whole bunch of times, and praise God, it looks like he will have a full recovery, despite the vicious attack against him. But look, there have been many more threats against elected officials. It's been documented that I've received a few. We have to calm the rhetoric down. We have to make sure that we treat each other with respect and condemn the violence whenever it occurs.
Mr. Pinion, the critics say that the rise in political violence nationwide is at least in part a consequence of fighting words and the combative tone struck by some members of the media. As a former broadcaster, do you think the media can, in fact, lower the temperature of political disputes?
I think
should it?
There is a greater responsibility that must be shared by the media. I would simply note there's only one person on this stage whose rhetoric has quite literally driven an American to the doorstep of a Supreme Court justice to kill him. That was Chuck Schumer. So at the end of the day, yes, we can talk about our institutions. We can talk about the overheated rhetoric. But nothing changes if nothing changes. And whether he wants to acknowledge it or not, it is Chuck Schumer whose divisive rhetoric has led to the environment that we see today. I will not lay all the blame at his feet, but he has been in D.C. for 42 years, 24 years in the United States Senate. His chief actual tool in politics is the division. We are here to unite this nation. We are here to unite this state. We are here to tell the untold story of pain and suffering in this state that has occurred on his watch. Issues I hope we talk about, the children living in poverty, the crime that has gripped this state. 12 major cities hit all-time highs for homicide. That's always part of this lack of accountability for the lawlessness that is all across this country because our leaders have not taken that scourge of crime and violence seriously.
Give him a chance to respond.
Yeah, the bottom line is that we do have to deal with violence. We have to deal with the heated rhetoric. I would say, for instance, that one of the people who's heated the rhetoric up the most is former President Trump. And so we all have to calm it down. I don't notice that Joe Biden has done any of that. You compare the rhetoric of Donald Trump to Joe Biden, it ain't close in terms of heatedness, in terms of divisiveness, in terms of pointing fingers at people.
Well, just respectfully, Joe Biden's not running for U.S. Senate in New York. Donald Trump is not running for U.S. Senate in New York. You are, sir, and you were the one that had that rhetoric. Do you feel as if that was responsible, and do you apologize to Justice Kavanaugh?
Mr. Schumer, did you want to respond?
Look, the bottom line is that I have never advocated violence in any way, never have, never do, never will. The words I used that day were probably the wrong choice of words, and I said that then and say it now.
The Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, debating Republican Joseph Pinion at Union College in Schenectady on Sunday. It was hosted by Spectrum News 1. Former President Donald Trump, in an interview on Sunday with Americano Media, called the attack on the husband of Speaker Pelosi a terrible thing, but he added, look at what's happened to San Francisco generally. Look at what's happened in Chicago. It was far worse than Afghanistan. We have to give the police back their dignity, their respect. They can solve the problem. The suspect in this case faces both state and federal charges. San Francisco Police Chief William Scott interviewed today on CNN about the investigation, asked about a possible motive for the attack, and also conspiracy theories that are now circulating about it.
Is political rhetoric to blame, perhaps?
Well, I mean, it's been quite widely reported. Some of the websites that Mr. DePape has been on, and you know, let me just say this: it is a very, very sad state of affairs with all the rhetoric that's out there, conspiracy theories that are out there. And we've spent a lot of energy just pushing back just really ridiculous conspiracy theories to make sure that people stay focused on our team on what they need to do, and that is uncover the evidence is there and really not get into all these wild conspiracy theories. And these things are harmful to society. They're harmful to the victims involved. They are just, it's really sad that we are here in this place, but we are. And I say that to answer your question. We have a lot of work to do on this case, and we don't want to get ahead of ourselves in terms of releasing information. Obviously, there's a political undertone on this, but at this point, I'm going to abide by what our prosecutors have asked us. We're working as a team, and we don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves.
And you talk about conspiracy theories that could have perhaps fueled this attack. There are also conspiracy theories that have come up since this attack about what happened. Can you clear it up once and for all? Did Paul Pelosi know his attacker?
There is absolutely no evidence that Mr. Pelosi knew this man. As a matter of fact, the evidence indicates the exact opposite. And again, this is, it really is sad that these theories are being floated out there, baseless, factless theories that are being floated out there, and they're damaging. They're damaging to the people involved. They're damaging to this investigation. And, people are running with this stuff, and whether they believe it or not, these theories can influence the way people think about everything that's happening here.
The San Francisco Police Chief William Scott interviewed today on CNN. Associated Press writes that the man accused of attacking Paul Pelosi, the husband of House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, told police he wanted to hold the speaker hostage and break her kneecaps, authorities said Monday. David DePape is charged federally with influencing, impeding, or retaliating against a federal official by threatening or injuring a family member. He also faces one count of attempted kidnapping of a United States official on account of the performance of official duties. This is Washington Today. Now to the war in Ukraine. The mayor of Kyiv announcing over Telegram that large portions of his city are without water and electricity after Russian missile and drone strikes on infrastructure. He writes, currently due to damage to the energy facility near Kyiv, 80% of the capital's consumers remain without water supply, and specialists are working to restore the operation of water stations as soon as possible. He also writes power engineers are working to restore power to 350,000 homes in Kyiv that were left without electricity. Meanwhile, this from Reuters, ships brought grain from Ukrainian ports on Monday, suggesting Moscow had stopped short of reimposing a blockade that might have caused world hunger, despite suspending its participation in a UN program to safely export grain from the war zone. That Russian pullout from the grain export deal condemned today at the U.S. State Department. Here's the spokesperson, Ned Price.
As the Secretary said on Saturday, we deeply regret Russia's decision to suspend its participation in the Black Sea Grain Initiative, which is having immediate harmful impacts on global food security. Russia should return to full participation in the initiative, and we urge all parties to swiftly agree to sustain this crucial program through the months to come. Any disruption to the initiative risks spiking food prices, lowering the confidence of insurers and commercial shippers who have returned to Black Sea routes, and further imposing hardships on lower-income countries already reeling from dire humanitarian crises and global food insecurity. The initiative that went into effect on August 1st has been a great success. It has brought more than 9.5 million metric tons of grain to world markets. It has enabled life-saving food aid to reach vulnerable people in Afghanistan, Somalia, Yemen, Ethiopia, and elsewhere. The initiative helped decrease global prices of grains and oils and reduce food insecurity in lower and middle-income countries. Russia is again weaponizing food in the war that it started. The most effective step to address the ongoing food security crisis would be for Russia to immediately return to the arrangement and to end its war against Ukraine.
The State Department spokesman Ned Price, part of his opening statements at his daily news conference today with reporters in the State Department briefing room. He also expressed the administration's condolences for 2 deadly tragedies over the weekend. At least 153 people killed in a crowd surge during a Halloween celebration in Seoul, South Korea, and at least 134 people killed in India when a pedestrian bridge collapsed. And among those killed in South Korea, 2 Americans, and one of those was the niece of a congressman, Brad Wenstrup, Republican from Ohio, who put out a statement. Monica and I and our entire family are grieving the loss of our niece, Anne Marie Giesky. She was a gift from God to our family. We loved her so much. Also today, the White House says that President Biden calling the Brazilian president-elect Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva to offer his congratulations on the weekend's runoff election victory, but the incumbent president, Jair Bolsonaro, has yet to concede. At the White House today, the return of a tradition. Halloween, with President Joe Biden and First Lady Jill Biden welcoming trick-or-treaters, those invited, children of local firefighters, nurses, police officers, and members of the National Guard. The Bidens were in Europe last year during Halloween, so this is their first opportunity for them in the White House to host the trick-or-treaters.
How are you? Oh, beautiful. Nice to thanks for coming by. Of course.
The White House Historical Society saying that Halloween has been celebrated at the White House since President Eisenhower, who decorated for the first time in 1958, and First Lady Mamie Eisenhower holding a luncheon for the wives of staff members. During President Kennedy's administration, photos of his young children dressed in costumes in the Oval Office were widely circulated. And then under President Nixon, the large events with local kids began. Joe Biden today also announcing that in celebration of Dia de los Muertos, the White House displaying an ofrenda in the West Garden Room and to honor and celebrate the lives of loved ones who have passed. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Subscribe to C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word to get the stories Washington is talking about sent to your inbox every day. You can sign up at c-span.org/connect. Have a good night.